Welcome to Toxic from Reddit, where real toxic relationship stories come to life. Here you'll hear true stories from people who experience toxic relationships from different perspectives. Partners dealing with cheating, manipulation, gaslighting, red flags, and all the emotional chaos that comes with loving someone who hurts you. Stories of betrayal, of finding strength to leave, of discovering the truth, of heartbreak, of healing, and the raw reality of toxic love. This is a real story, shared anonymously on Reddit. Some details have been changed to protect the identity of the people involved. Hi everyone, my name is Rachel, I'm 32 years old, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. And I need to tell you about the most devastating and soul-crushing revelation that has destroyed my entire marriage and has made me question every moment of the past 5 years of my life, which is that 3 weeks ago, my husband's mother, who was dying of cancer, called me to her hospital bedside and confessed to me that my husband only married me to get a green card and American citizenship, that he never actually loved me, that their entire family had been in on the deception from the beginning, that he has a girlfriend back in his home country that he's been in contact with this whole time, and that he was planning to divorce me as soon as he got his permanent residency. And now I'm dealing with the horrifying reality that my entire marriage has been a lie, that I've been used as nothing more than a visa ticket, and that the man I loved and trusted never had any real feelings for me at all. I'm going to tell you this entire story from the beginning because the level of deception and manipulation is so deep and so calculated that you need to understand how I was targeted, how I was used, and how an entire family conspired to deceive me for years. My husband's name is Dimitri, he's 35 years old, and he's originally from Moldova, which is a small country in Eastern Europe. Dimitri and I met 5 years ago when I was working as an immigration paralegal at a law firm in Boston. Dimitri had come to the United States on a work visa, and he was working as an engineer for a manufacturing company in the Boston area. Dimitri came to our law firm because he needed help with his visa paperwork, and I was assigned to work on his case. Dimitri and I had several meetings to discuss his visa situation, and during those meetings I found myself attracted to him because he was handsome, intelligent, charming, and he had this vulnerability about him that made me want to help him and protect him. Dimitri would tell me stories about his life in Moldova, about how difficult things were there economically, about how he had come to America to build a better life, and about how grateful he was for the opportunities he had here. I felt sympathetic toward Dimitri, and I admired his work ethic and his determination to succeed. After a few months of working together professionally, Dimitri asked me out to dinner, and I said yes. I was excited about the prospect of dating Dimitri, although I was also a little concerned about the ethics of dating a client. I talked to my supervisor at the law firm, and my supervisor said that as long as I wasn't directly handling Dimitri's case anymore, it would be okay for us to date. So I transferred Dimitri's case to another paralegal, and Dimitri and I started dating. The relationship moved quickly, and within a few months, Dimitri and I were spending almost every day together. Dimitri was attentive and romantic, like he would bring me flowers, he would cook traditional Moldovan meals for me, he would tell me how beautiful I was and how lucky he was to have found me. Dimitri would talk about his family back in Moldova, and he would show me photos of his mother, his father, and his younger sister. Dimitri would tell me how much he missed his family and how he wished they could come to visit him in America, but that they couldn't afford the trip and that it was difficult to get visitor visas. I felt sad for Dimitri that he was separated from his family, and I wanted to help him in any way I could. About 6 months into our relationship, Dimitri's work visa was coming up for renewal, and Dimitri was worried that it might not be approved because the company he was working for was having financial difficulties and might not be able to sponsor him anymore. Dimitri was stressed and anxious about the possibility of having to leave the United States, and he would talk about how devastating it would be to have to go back to Moldova after he had worked so hard to build a life in America. I felt terrible seeing Dimitri so worried, and I wanted to help him find a solution. One evening, Dimitri and I were having dinner at my apartment, and Dimitri seemed particularly sad and distant. I asked him what was wrong, and Dimitri said that he had received news that his work visa renewal was probably not going to be approved, and that he would likely have to leave the United States within a few months. I felt my heart sink because I had fallen in love with Dimitri, and I didn't want him to leave. I said, "Isn't there anything we can do? Isn't there any other way for you to stay in the country?" Dimitri was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Well, there is one way, but I would never ask you to do it." I said, "What is it? Tell me." Dimitri said, "If we got married, I could apply for a green card through you, but I know that's a huge commitment, and I would never expect you to do that just so I could stay in the country." I thought about it for a moment, and I realized that I loved Dimitri, and that I could see a future with him, and that getting married didn't seem like such a crazy idea. I said, "Dimitri, I love you, and I don't want you to leave, And if getting married means that we can stay together, then I'm willing to do it. Dmitry looked surprised, and he said, "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. This is a big decision." I said, "I'm sure. I want to marry you, not just so you can stay in the country, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you." Dmitry seemed emotional, and he hugged me and said, "I love you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. You're saving my life." Looking back now, I realized that this entire conversation was probably manipulated and orchestrated by Dmitry, and that he had been planning to get me to offer to marry him all along. But at the time, I genuinely believed that Dmitry loved me, and that we were making this decision together because we wanted to be together. Dmitry and I got married 2 months later, in a small ceremony at Boston City Hall. We didn't have a big wedding because Dmitry said he wanted to save money, and because his family couldn't afford to travel from Moldova to attend. I was a little disappointed that we didn't have a traditional wedding, but I understood Dmitry's financial concerns, and I told myself that we could always have a bigger celebration later. After we got married, Dmitry and I immediately started the process of applying for his green card. Because of my experience working as an immigration paralegal, I was familiar with the process, and I helped Dmitry prepare all of the necessary paperwork. We had to provide evidence that our marriage was legitimate, so we submitted photos of us together, joint bank account statements, a lease showing that we lived together, and affidavits from friends and family saying that they believed our marriage was real. We also had to attend an interview at the immigration office, where an officer asked us questions about our relationship to verify that we were actually a married couple, and not just committing marriage fraud for immigration purposes. Dmitry and I prepared extensively for the interview, and we made sure that we knew details about each other's lives, like what time we woke up in the morning, what we ate for breakfast, what side of the bed we slept on, and other intimate details that a real married couple would know. The interview went well, and a few months later, Dmitry received his conditional green card, which meant that he could live and work in the United States legally for 2 years, and then he could apply to have the conditions removed and receive his permanent green card. I was so happy that Dmitry's green card had been approved, and I felt proud that I had been able to help him achieve his dream of staying in America. Dmitry seemed happy too, and he would tell me how grateful he was, and how he was going to spend the rest of his life making me happy, and showing me how much he appreciated what I had done for him. For the first year of our marriage, things seemed relatively normal. Like Dmitry and I lived together, we spent time together, we went on dates, and we acted like a normal married couple. But I started to notice some things that made me feel uneasy. Like Dmitry was often on his phone texting or calling people, and when I would ask him who he was talking to, he would say it was his family or friends from Moldova. Dmitry would also spend a lot of time on his computer, and he would quickly close the browser or minimize windows when I would walk into the room. I thought this was strange, but I didn't want to be a suspicious or controlling wife, so I tried not to read too much into it. Dmitry also started working longer hours, and he would often come home late at night saying that he had been working overtime, or that he had gone out with coworkers. I wanted to be supportive of Dmitry's career, so I didn't complain. But I did feel lonely and neglected because we were spending less time together. About a year and a half into our marriage, I started bringing up the idea of starting a family because I was 30 years old and I wanted to have children. Dmitry would always change the subject or would say that we should wait until his immigration status was more secure or until we had saved more money. I was disappointed, but I understood that Dmitry wanted to be financially stable before having children, so I agreed to wait. Around the 2-year mark of our marriage, Dmitry had to apply to remove the conditions on his green card and to get his permanent residency. We went through the process again, submitting more evidence of our marriage and attending another interview. The interview went smoothly, and Dmitry's permanent green card was approved. I remember Dmitry being extremely happy and relieved when he received his permanent green card, and he took me out to a nice dinner to celebrate. But after Dmitry received his permanent green card, I noticed that he became even more distant and even less interested in our marriage. Dmitry started spending more time away from home. He stopped being affectionate with me, and he seemed irritated and annoyed whenever I would try to talk to him about our relationship or our future. I tried to talk to Dmitry about the changes I was noticing, and I asked him if he was happy in our marriage. And Dmitry would say that everything was fine and that he was just stressed about work. But I could tell that something was wrong, and I started to feel like Dmitry was pulling away from me. About 6 months ago, Dmitry told me that his mother back in Moldova had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that she didn't have much time left. Dmitry was devastated, and he said that he needed to go back to Moldova to be with his mother during her final months. I felt terrible for Dmitry, and I offered to go with him to Moldova to support him and to meet his family. But Dmitry said that it would be too expensive for both of us to go, and that he needed to go alone. I was hurt that Dmitry didn't want me to come with him, but I tried to be understanding because I knew he was going through a difficult time. Dmitry left for Moldova, and he was gone for almost 3 months. During that time, Dmitry and I barely communicated. Like, he would send me short text messages every few days saying that he was okay and that his mother was declining, but he wouldn't call me or video chat with me. I felt abandoned and confused, and I started to wonder if Dmitry even wanted to be married to me anymore. When Dmitry finally came back to Boston, he seemed different, like he was cold and distant, and he barely acknowledged me when he walked through the door. I tried to hug Dmitry and to comfort him about his mother, but Dmitry pulled away from me and said that he was tired and that he needed space. Over the next few weeks, Dmitry and I barely spoke, and we were essentially living like roommates rather than like a married couple. I tried multiple times to talk to Dmitry about what was going on, but Dmitry would shut down and would say that he didn't want to talk about it. I was miserable, and I felt like my marriage was falling apart, but I didn't know what to do to fix it. Then, about 3 weeks ago, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize with an international country code. I answered the phone, and a woman with a heavy accent said, "Hello, is this Rachel, Dmitry's wife?" I said, "Yes, this is Rachel. Who is this?" The woman said, "This is Dmitry's mother. I'm calling from the hospital in Moldova." I was shocked because Dmitry had told me that his mother had died 2 weeks earlier and that he had already attended her funeral before coming back to Boston. I said, "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. Dmitry told me that you passed away." The woman said, "No, I'm still alive, but I don't have much time left. I'm calling because there's something I need to tell you before I die." I felt confused and alarmed, and I said, "Okay, what is it?" Dmitry's mother said, "I need to tell you the truth about why Dmitry married you. He didn't marry you because he loved you. He married you to get a green card and to stay in America." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs, and I said, "What are you talking about? That's not true." Dmitry's mother said, "It is true. Dmitry never loved you. He was using you from the beginning. Our whole family knew about it. We helped him plan it." I said, "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Dmitry's mother said, "Because I'm dying, and I can't die with this guilt on my conscience. What we did to you was wrong, and you deserve to know the truth." Dmitry's mother went on to explain that Dmitry had been in a relationship with a woman named Irina back in Moldova for over 7 years, and that they had been planning to get married. But Dmitry had come to the United States on a work visa with the intention of eventually bringing Irina to America. When Dmitry's work visa was in jeopardy, Dmitry and his family had come up with a plan for Dmitry to marry an American citizen so that he could get a green card. Dmitry had specifically targeted me because I worked in immigration law, and because he thought I would be sympathetic to his situation and would be willing to help him. Dmitry's mother said that Dmitry had never had any real feelings for me, and that everything he had done, the romance, the affection, the promises, had all been an act to manipulate me into marrying him. Dmitry's mother said that Dmitry had been in contact with Irina the entire time he had been married to me, and that he had been sending money back to Moldova to support Irina and to save up so that they could eventually be together. Dmitry's mother said that Dmitry's plan had been to divorce me as soon as he received his permanent green card, and then to bring Irina to the United States and to marry her. I was sobbing, and I said, "Why are you telling me this? Why did you let this happen?" Dmitry's mother said, "Because we were desperate. Life in Moldova is very hard, and we wanted Dmitry to have a better life in America, but what we did was wrong. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Dmitry's mother said, "I'm telling you this now because I don't want to die knowing that you're still being deceived. You deserve to know the truth so that you can move on with your life." I said, "Does Dmitry know that you're calling me?" Dmitry's mother said, "No, he doesn't know, and he would be very angry if he knew I was telling you this. But I don't care anymore. I'm dying, and I need to make this right." I thanked Dmitry's mother for telling me the truth, even though I was devastated, and I hung up the phone. I sat on the floor of my apartment and cried for hours because my entire world had just been shattered. Everything I had believed about my marriage, about Dmitry's love for me, about our future together, had all been a lie. I felt used, betrayed, humiliated, and heartbroken. When Dmitry came home that evening, I confronted him immediately. I said, "I just got off the phone with your mother and she told me everything. She told me that you only married me for a green card and that you never loved me." Dmitry's face went pale and he said, "What are you talking about? My mother is dead." I said, "No, she's not. She's alive. And she called me from the hospital and she told me the truth about everything." Dmitry looked panicked and he tried to deny it. And he said, "She's lying. She's confused because of the medication. You can't believe what she's saying." I said, "Stop lying to me, Dmitry. I know the truth. I know about Irina. I know that you've been planning to divorce me. I know that your entire family was in on this. Dmitry realized that he couldn't deny it anymore, and he just stood there in silence. I said, "How could you do this to me? How could you use me like this? How could you lie to me for 5 years?" Dmitry said, "I'm sorry, I didn't have a choice. I needed to stay in America." I said, "You did have a choice. You chose to deceive me. You chose to manipulate me. You chose to make me fall in love with you when you never had any real feelings for me." I said, "Did you ever love me? Even a little bit?" Dmitry looked down and he said, "I cared about you. But no, I was never in love with you." I felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest, and I said, "Get out. Get out of my apartment right now." Dmitry tried to say something, but I screamed at him to leave, and he finally grabbed some of his things and left. I spent the next several days in a state of shock and grief, like I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop crying. I felt like my entire life had been a lie, and I didn't know how to process the betrayal. I called in sick to work, and I just stayed in my apartment trying to make sense of what had happened. After a few days, I started to get angry, and I realized that I needed to take action to protect myself. I contacted an immigration attorney, and I explained the situation, and I asked what my options were. The attorney told me that marriage fraud is a serious crime, and that both Dmitry and I could potentially face legal consequences if it was proven that our marriage was fraudulent. The attorney said that I should report the fraud to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and that I should cooperate fully with any investigation. The attorney also said that I should file for divorce immediately, and that I should try to gather any evidence I could find that would prove that Dmitry had married me fraudulently. I followed the attorney's advice, and I filed a report with USCIS detailing everything that Dmitry's mother had told me, and explaining that I had been deceived into marrying Dmitry. I also filed for divorce, and I moved forward with separating my finances from Dmitry's. I started going through Dmitry's belongings that he had left in the apartment, and I found evidence that confirmed everything his mother had told me. I found emails between Dmitry and Irina where they talked about their plans for the future, and where Dmitry told Irina that he loved her and that he couldn't wait to be with her again. I found bank statements showing that Dmitry had been sending large amounts of money to Moldova on a regular basis. I found photos of Dmitry and Irina together that had been taken during the times when Dmitry had supposedly been visiting his sick mother. I provided all of this evidence to USCIS and to my divorce attorney. A few weeks later, I was contacted by an immigration investigator who wanted to interview me about my marriage to Dmitry. I met with the investigator, and I told them everything. About how Dmitry and I had met, about how he had manipulated me into marrying him, about the phone call from his mother, and about all of the evidence I had found. The investigator told me that they would be opening a formal investigation into Dmitry's immigration case, and that his green card could potentially be revoked if they found evidence of fraud. The investigator also told me that Dmitry could face criminal charges for marriage fraud, which could result in fines and even jail time. I felt a sense of relief knowing that Dmitry was going to be held accountable for what he had done, but I also felt sad and empty, because my marriage and my trust had been destroyed. I've been going to therapy to help me process the betrayal, and to help me understand how I was manipulated. My therapist has explained to me that people who commit marriage fraud are often very skilled manipulators, and that they specifically target people who are kind, trusting, and empathetic. My therapist has helped me understand that I was targeted because of my profession, and because Dmitry knew that I would be sympathetic to his immigration situation. My therapist has also been helping me work through my feelings of shame and embarrassment, because I feel stupid for not seeing the signs earlier. But my therapist has reassured me that I'm not stupid, and that Dmitry was very calculated and very convincing in his deception. I've been thinking a lot about the red flags that I missed, like how quickly Dmitry wanted to get married, how he didn't want to have a real wedding, how he became distant after he got his green card, how he didn't want me to meet his family, and how he was always secretive about his phone and computer. I've realized that all of these were signs that something wasn't right, but I ignored them because I was in love, and because I wanted to believe that Dmitry loved me too. I've been thinking about Dmitry's mother, and about why she decided to tell me the truth. I believe that she genuinely felt guilty about what her family had done to me, and that she wanted to make amends before she died. I'm grateful that she told me the truth, even though it was devastating, because at least now I know the reality of my situation and I can move forward. I later found out through Dmitry's sister, who reached out to me on social media, that their mother did pass away about a week after she called me. Dmitry's sister apologized to me for her family's role in the deception, and she said that she had always felt uncomfortable with the plan, but had gone along with it because of family pressure. I've been thinking about Irina, the woman in Moldova who Dmitry was actually in love with, and I wonder if she knew that Dmitry was married to someone else, or if she thought that Dmitry's marriage to me was just a formality for immigration purposes. I wonder if she feels any guilt about being part of a plan that involved deceiving and using another person. I've been thinking about the immigration system and about how people like Dimitri are able to exploit it by manipulating vulnerable people into fraudulent marriages. I think there need to be better safeguards in place to protect people from being used in this way. I've been thinking about my own healing process and about how I'm going to move forward after this betrayal. I know that it's going to take a long time for me to trust again, and I know that I'm going to be much more cautious in future relationships. But I'm committed to doing the work to heal, and I'm committed to not letting this experience make me bitter or cynical. I've been spending time with friends and family who love and support me, and I've been focusing on rebuilding my sense of self-worth and my confidence. I've also been volunteering with an organization that helps victims of immigration fraud, because I want to use my experience to help other people who have been through similar situations. The divorce process is ongoing, and I'm hoping that it will be finalized soon so that I can officially close this chapter of my life. The immigration investigation is also ongoing, and I don't know yet what the outcome will be for Dimitri, but I'm cooperating fully with the investigators. I've been thinking about other people who might be in similar situations, who might be married to someone who only married them for immigration benefits, and I want to tell them that they're not alone. I want to tell them that marriage fraud is more common than people realize, and that it can happen to anyone, regardless of how smart or careful they are. I want to tell them that if they suspect that their spouse married them for fraudulent reasons, they should trust their instincts and they should investigate. I want to tell them that they should look for red flags like a spouse who becomes distant after receiving immigration benefits, a spouse who is secretive about their communications with people in their home country, or a spouse who doesn't want to integrate you into their family or their life. And I want to tell them that if they discover that they've been used in a fraudulent marriage, it's not their fault, and they shouldn't be ashamed. I want to tell them that they should report the fraud to the authorities, because marriage fraud is a crime, and the perpetrators need to be held accountable. And I want to tell them that healing is possible, and that even though the betrayal feels devastating right now, they will eventually be able to trust again, and to open their hearts to someone who truly loves them. Thank you for reading my story, and if you've been through something similar, if you've been used in a fraudulent marriage, if you've discovered that your spouse never actually loved you, if you've had to report immigration fraud, or if you've had to rebuild your life after discovering that your entire marriage was a lie, I would love to hear how you dealt with it and where you are now. I'm still healing from this experience, still going through the divorce process, still cooperating with the immigration investigation, and still working on rebuilding my ability to trust. But I'm hopeful about the future, and I'm grateful that I learned the truth before I wasted any more years of my life with someone who was using me.